All right, we're at 6:04, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Earlier today, I was a little bit nervous about speaking into an empty room, so I invited some of my friends to join me. I have Biggie Smalls here. I mean, he's always good. And then I have from um, Wakanda, Black Panther, Okoye. So I feel like I'm in good company. I have good help here, people to help me stay on track and feel positive. Um, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrea Sawyer-Kirksey, and I am the executive director for DOOR, which stands for Discovering Opportunities for Outreach and Reflection. And DOOR is in 3 cities right now: Chicago, Atlanta, and Denver. And we invite folks to our cities to do experiential learning, service learning. So they do service projects, and then we engage with them around topics around justice and the marginalized, racism, anti-racism, all that stuff. You know, we sort of lay it on thick for middle schoolers and high schoolers. And they all survive, some by just like the skin of their teeth. But it's always a good experience and exchange. And for DOOR, we feel like it's really important for us that if we invite folks into communities that are already feeling trauma and marginalized and the effects of systematic injustice and microaggressions, that if we're inviting young and old white folks from other spaces into these communities, that we do our best to help educate them so that they do less harm. We know that programs like ours, DOOR, and other programs, year-long programs, a lot of it is rooted in colonization, and we can't get away from that. And so our responsibility is to name that, to address that, to educate about it, to hold people accountable, and to honor the stories and the lives that are in our communities that we invite folks to. So that's a little bit about the work that I do. I'll share more about that in and through my talk. I am from Chicago, born and raised. I'm a West Sider, living on the North Side, which is sort of like treason. It's, you know, if you're born on a side of Chicago, like you're expected to stay there and get carried out. So, but my wife and I, several years ago, when we got married, and then we bought a condo on the north side of Chicago. So, because that's what we could afford to live. So we ain't gonna talk about gentrification in this talk, but that is definitely a reality that a lot of people face in the city. So today I really want to talk about, or begin to engage in, this idea of cultural humility. And a lot of people have different ideas around cultural humility, or different framing for that: cultural intelligence or cultural sensitivity. And I'll break down sort of the definition that I'm using, but I'm definitely going with cultural humility. And when I do this workshop in classrooms with people who can talk back to me, I usually ask them to name or list off some things that come to mind when you think about cultural humility. Like, what are some things that come to mind, or what do you think is the essence of cultural humility, some of the components of it? And you are free to write some of those in the chat. I'm going to read off some of the ones that I've heard from students and other folks. They say that cultural humility, the word that comes to mind for them is love, opening, listening, equity, inclusion, respect, being, you, me, receiving, wonder, life. So those are just some. And I see some people writing, someone put listening, observing, dignity, and respect. All right, y'all, embracing the differences. Y'all gonna help me teach this thing. And for that, I am appreciative. So these are the things, this is the essence of cultural humility. It's about how we enter into each other's spaces as learners, right? Whether that space is our home, or we're sharing a church together, or our place of employment, or the grocery store. All of these places, someone put asking, learning, yes, as learners, yes, that is the base, yes. So the first thing I want to do is start off by playing an audio clip for you. And this is, there was a situation in Chicago a couple years ago. I don't know if people remember, Chicago sort of got this nickname of Chirac because of some of the violence that we were facing here in Chicago. And the media started to perpetuate this negative stereotype by referring to the city as Chirac. So I'm gonna play this clip. These are some kids from the South Side of an elementary school. I'm gonna play that clip. It's about 4 minutes, so buckle up. There's no visual or anything to it. It's just the kids taking us through this.
This week, the Chicago Tribune published an op-ed written by a class of 5th graders. It's entitled, "You Don't Know Us," and it's a retort for much of the news media, written by a group of students from the Bradwell School of Excellence in the city's South Shore neighborhood, which is one of the areas that's seen so many murders in recent years, a place some have come to call Chirac. We're joined now by 2 of those students from Bradwell, Rondale Sanders and Damiante Rogers, as well as their teacher, Lindsay Rose. Let me say hello to all of you. Thanks for being with us.
Hello. Hello. Thank you for having us.
I was very moved by this essay when I saw it in the paper this week, and I wonder if I can get each of you to read an excerpt from this essay.
We saw your news trucks and cameras here last week, and we read the articles. 6 shot at South Shore Laundromat and another mass shooting in Tarrytown. We saw the reporters with fancy suits in front of our laundromat. You spent 24 hours here, but you really don't know us. Those who don't know us think this is a poor neighborhood with those abandoned buildings everywhere, with wood covering the windows and broken doors. Those who don't know us see the police on the corner and think that we're all violence and drugs.
We want you to know us. We aren't afraid.
We know that man on the corner. He works at the store and gives us free lemon heads. Those girls jumping rope are Precious and Anaya and Nevia. The people in the suits are people not going to funerals, but to church.
If you listen, you will hear the laughter and chattering from a group of girls on the corner who are best friends and really care about each other. Do you see the smile on the cashier's face when the kids walk in? Why? Because this neighborhood is filled with love. This isn't Chirac. This is home. This is us.
That's a very fine piece of work that you guys did. Thank you for reading it.
Thank you.
What made you write it? Rondale?
It wasn't really hard to write it because I always try to see the good things out of bad. So as a class, we wrote, and it inspired a lot of people. So I'm really proud of myself.
Well, I bet your families and your friends, everybody's proud of you. Damiante, why did you think it was important to do this?
I thought about, like, if we write this, like, usually a lot of people read the newspaper, so it, like, made me write it to, like, try to change, like, what we live at.
Ms. Rose, but I understand when this essay came out, you had a hard time finding a copy of the paper.
Yeah, I was so excited on Monday, and I'd called a couple of students on Friday to tell them it was going to be published, and I said, oh, you can go to the gas station and get a copy of the Tribune, and that's a gas station that we all go to all the time. I got there and went in, and there's no Tribune, and I said to the gas station guys, there's no Tribune. They said, no, they don't bring it down there. So I ended up having to drive several blocks to find a copy to take to them.
So, without trying to make this into too much of a metaphor, it seems to me, both reading this essay and hearing that you're kind of saying that the news media will come to South Shore and Woodlawn for a murder, but they won't see the folks who live there as part of their audience and bring in their newspaper.
I think you're absolutely right, because in the newspaper, that was positive things. Us writing that article,
Yeah.
but it's sad to see that they won't send out copies for us to see the positive parts of life, but they'll send out news trucks to see the negative parts of life.
Ms. Rose, was this hard for your students?
To write it?
To write it, to live it?
Yeah, it was hard when we started, because when we started working on that first part of the essay, what do you think people know about you? The students were able to rattle off lots of the stereotypes they know about their neighborhood. But when we got to the second part, it took us a while to think of what are the great things. And I think that's a testament to the narrative that we hear so often. And furthermore, a testament to the need for the counter narrative that they wrote so that they can tell a different story of their lives and their experience.
Rondell, what do you want to do in the next few years or when you grow up?
I think I want to be more public so I can make a bigger change or a bigger impact on our neighborhood, to give back to the neighborhood.
Yeah. You want to help your community?
Yes.
How do you think you can do that?
I think I can help my community by keep writing what I feel, keep writing the good things about where I live.
From the Bradwell School of Excellence on Chicago's South Shore. Rondale Sanders, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Demiante Rogers, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Lindsay Rose, Ms. Rose, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us and hearing their voices.
So I really love that piece, hearing those kids' voices, wanting to tell their story, and I think about the list that I read off, and then some of you were chiming in on the side with some words about what we think of when we think of cultural humility. And in that piece, what these kids were addressing was the fact that they were not hearing love. They were not hearing equity and inclusion. They were not hearing about wonder, right? They were not hearing people listening to them or being open to their life. Really what they were hearing was a lot of people judging them and trying to tell their story about their community. And this is why cultural humility is so important. And it's always been important, but it feels like the world is on fire. And when the world is on fire, especially when we're having this COVID-19 virus, we're really getting pushed into each other's spaces in ways that we haven't or anticipated. And then just with our political climate, people are saying things out loud that maybe they only said in their head. And I guess that's good because we can begin to address it. But it's also horrifying for the people who have to be on the receiving end of that. And so I want to talk about the definition of cultural humility. Like I said, some people will use other words, cultural competency or sensitivity. And my problem with competency is that I feel like it doesn't go far enough, or it gives this sense of people thinking that they know something about other folks because maybe they've studied it. There's been a lot of times in my life where I've had people trying to describe to me or tell me about something that's affecting the Black community, and their reason for their claim that they understand this is because they study African American history while they were in college, or Asian American history, or some kind of history. And they think that because of that, let's see, I can see you. Sorry, I'm reading the list. And I shouldn't be because it's distracting, but keep writing. But they think that because they have studied something that or did a year of service in the hood, living in a poor neighborhood. And so they believe that gives them a platform to now speak to the lived experience of other people. And so the definition, and then cultural sensitivity also doesn't go far enough for me. It can really even be even more problematic. This idea that, oh, if we're just sort of sensitive to each other, you know, it's the difference of somebody thinking that if they ask if they can touch my hair is different from them just touching my hair. Which one of them will get you seeing a side of me that you ain't ready for. But the idea of, you know, so when I respond to them and say, you know what, it's inappropriate for you to ask to touch my hair. And they may say like, well, I think you're being too sensitive, or I don't know why you're being so upset. Like I asked, I didn't just touch your hair, I asked. And, you know, I have to share with them that, you know, thinking that that part of your sensitivity, like asking permission, somehow gives you the right or gives you an opinion that I should not be as upset. So I think that sometimes this cultural sensitivity can be dangerous because it allows people to just sort of be left to their own interpretation about what is sensitive. And then and by that encroaching into other people's rights to feel upset or not upset. And so the cultural humility, so I'm going to read it. I'm not going to share my screen. I have my notes so people can see me. Cultural humility incorporates a consistent commitment to learning and reflection. Those words are so important, that consistent, you know, not this one and done, or I studied, you know, African-American history or, you know, Native history or, you know, Latinx history for a year or 9 months. And now I'm sort of done, like I've arrived. It's this consistent commitment to learning and reflection. That reflection is also good. You know, when I have these, interactions with people, sort of like with the hair touching, that reflection part is the part where some people go to their white fragility and feel upset and feel like I haven't been hospitable to them, or as Christians, we should have this space of love for them, or I should have that for them, and they have a right to be upset, you know. Whereas for me, that part of reflection, that's a place where you can really start to engage with me and think about why it is that you feel that you have crossed my boundaries and you still have space to feel like the victim, right? But what would it look like for that person to actually go away and reflect and to begin to go into Google search, even if you Google something as random as like, why do Black women want to smack you if you try to touch their hair? Some good stuff will come up, I promise you. So this idea of learning in reflection. But it's also about understanding powers and dynamic and how what's one's own role in society. So this idea that it takes consistent commitment to learning and reflection, it takes exploring and looking into power dynamics, and it also involves recognizing one's own role in society. So if I was to sort of just paraphrase that or wrap that up, that definition, one would be lifelong learning. So that's that consistent commitment to lifelong learning. The second would be power dynamics, not just recognizing them, but addressing them and challenging them. So, you know, in our households, in our places of worship, in our work, you know, when you're at work and somebody makes an assumption about somebody else because of their cultural background, that's where you can recognize your power dynamic. If it's the boss, like the worker's not going to say anything to them, but you can, right? Or if you're the boss and you come in and you say, hey, if I ever say anything that's inappropriate to people or makes anybody feel some type of way, please know that you can come and talk to me. Really? you're the boss? Is that really true, right? And what are the things that you can put in place in those places and spaces that can bring in equity and bring in safety and security for folks who really do have a problem with you and the things that you may say, the micro or macro aggressions that you are placing upon them, can they really address those? And then the last one I would say is accountability. So lifelong learning, power dynamics, addressing them and challenging them, and then taking accountability in whatever space you are in. Institutions, schools, churches, businesses. You know, once I was speaking at a conference, and I was asking some kids to do some volunteer and take some parts in the workshop. And a kid came up to me, African-American young man, and he said to me, I feel like because my pants are sagging and I seem a certain way, that you're not calling on me. You haven't chosen me to do X, Y, and Z. And he's right. There was bias in me. And so cultural humility is about accountability, doing your own work. Somebody else said, yes, doing your own work and learn and reflect. And we all have this work to do. No one is exempt from this space of cultural humility. You know, as people of color, we are living in a society that was not built for us. The American dream is not our dream. It was never meant for us. And what happens is that the realization of that sometimes pits us against each other, and we address each other's culture in some pretty negative ways. And so this work is for all of humanity, all humankind. When I talk about diversity, I would have had a slide up there because I want us to think about not just Black and white, not just all these binaries, right? But marginalized and socially excluded groups around nationality and ethnicity, native language, race, gender, sexual orientation, social class, spiritual beliefs and practices. You know, we've had this since, well, 9/11 was really when we pulled back sort of the curtain on this, of being attacking other cultures when there's something bad that happens, that people want to connect a whole group of folks to that action. And so diversity and thinking about cultural humility is across all of that. The way that we worship or don't worship, physical and mental abilities, age, education, educational status, family status, health, customs. It's a whole list of things. And then we know that with the complexity of intersectionality, that there are even more things that come into this idea of diversity, because none of us are just one thing. I am a Black woman who is gay, who is a lesbian, married to another woman who is a pastor. Now, some people say, you just trying to get all the diversity in one place. I am not, because all of those labels come with a lot of trauma and pain because of people's lack of cultural humility. And I can walk into one room and have power because of some of those things, and walk into another room and be at a disadvantage because of those. Or I could be in a room already, and depending on who comes in or who comes out, it can change the dynamics of that. And that's why cultural humility is about this lifelong exercise of learning and engaging with one another. And so this idea of cultural humility, it's not easy. It takes a lot of work, y'all. And there are things in our lives that get us to the places where we are and around some of the thoughts that we have. And so it takes change. It takes change of minds and attitudes and practices and beliefs, and who gets the power and how we share it, and who's valuable, who has a right to be in the room or who has a right to be at the table. And change is not easy. And many of us, myself included, want to resist change. And we resist it, and people have to drag us kicking and screaming sometimes. And that makes it difficult for everyone involved. But when our eyes are open, and when we have some exposure to things that are places and spaces of inequity and lack inclusion and diversity, we can either sort of close our eyes to it and believe that we didn't see it, or we have to address it. You know, COVID-19 has brought a lot of stuff to the forefront. You know, Black people dying like at a higher rate than other people, and a lack of cultural humility would lead folks to begin blaming and shaming Black people. And when this first started breaking, you know, in the news, on Facebook, you know, people were like, oh, that's because Black people like to party and they like to hang out and they like to, you know, do all of these things. And they once heard that COVID didn't affect Black people. Black people couldn't get it. They weren't sick, and they didn't really research that. It's a shaming and blaming game. But when we engage with cultural humility, this list again about love, about wonder, about listening, about observing, about caring, about you and about me, when we start to dig a little deeper, we start to uncover the institutional racism, right? The anti-Blackness that is played out in the medical field and in the workplace. The fact that people of color haven't had access to testing, or that they're doing the, you know, all these essential workers, people who are delivering groceries to our doors or working in Walgreens and CVS without masks and all these things are majority people of color. And so, yeah, they're dying at a higher rate than other folks because their life is being the least protected. And so cultural humility allows us to hear stories in the media, in the newspaper, on Facebook, and have wonder about that. It causes us to dig deeper to get a fuller understanding, because cultural humility makes us choose between being right and being human. And I hope that thought of being human outweighs being right. So the hard work of this becomes something that we embrace and we deal with, and we say that we're willing to take on the challenge because we want to live in the essence of cultural humility. So most of us resist this change, but we know that if we resist this, if we embrace and lean into change, that we can make the world a better place. And I know that sounds a little bit kumbaya-ish, like, we are the people, you know, whatever that song was. But when we talk about making the world a better place, we're not just talking about the niceties. We're talking about people having access to healthcare, people who go to the hospital who are Black and brown, and when they say they have pain, that it's not interpreted as you're being over dramatic or you're just looking for drugs, right? That there's this deeper sense of education and equity in that. And all of these things that help people to sustain and have a more rich and purposeful life. And so there are some things that, leaning into this, it takes compromise and patience and understanding to do this. And so for folks who are in churches, sometimes they say they want to have this multicultural or multi-ethnic or diverse worship space, but they don't want to do the work to find out what every single word in that worship service means and how it falls on the ears of everyone in the room, and how something that you may think is actually bringing life to a community can be triggering and bringing pain. My wife and I were at the store a couple weeks ago, maybe I'm gonna say 4 weeks, so y'all think I'm social distancing and doing all the right things, which we are. And there was a woman who was caught on something in the aisle, and I heard somebody say, ouch, 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 ouch. And so I turned around and I saw a woman and I said, oh, do you need help? Can I help you? And she said to me, I didn't ask for your help, wrong color. Those were her exact words. I did not ask for your help, wrong color. So this idea that just because you put people together in our neighborhood in Rogers Park, where I live, is the most diverse neighborhood in Chicago. I mean, you can literally see the whole world pass you by. And a lot of people like to brag about that. Our, mayor and our, aldermen and people in our community, they love bragging about how this is so multicultural and multi-ethnic, and you can get all kinds of foods and, experience all kinds of things. But we don't want to talk about the fact that without cultural humility is a hotbed of abuse. And so doing this work and exposing the need for cultural humility is very important work. And cultural humility helps us to recognize the power and influence of dominant cultures. A white straight man can get into a time capsule and get out anywhere in time, and things go well for them. And all of us, because of intersectionality, hold places of power and influence in our bodies. And cultural intelligence helps us to recognize that power and the influence of that culture and that dominance. Because if we don't recognize it, we are surely in a place to abuse people. And so cultural humility helps us to recognize the powers and influence of culture. It also helps us to address the powers of privilege. I mean, citizenship, right? Like, what kind of power can we hold over other people's lives when we don't acknowledge and recognize that our privilege of citizenship means that two people dealing with the same issue, if two folks are dealing with domestic abuse, and one of them is undocumented, the resources that they have available to them, whether it's because someone has told them they don't have resources, or they've taken the temperature of the culture around them, means that they may have to continue to endure that abuse because they're afraid to report, because they're afraid that they may be deported. Versus somebody who has citizenship, who can go and report something and go and tell their story, and without fear that trying to get your own liberation means that from one person means that you give up your liberation in another space. And so how cultural humility plays in that for those of us who are exercising and learning and growing in this area is that we're pushing legislation. Like we're acknowledging that not everybody has the same level of protection in this country, that not everybody has the same level of ability to get their needs met, right? And so if you have a church or a school or a business or whatever, when you're making your policies, your handbooks, your regulations, right? That you're viewing it through this lens of cultural humility about all the people who are around you. And how do you protect folks? And how do you go to folks and ask what it is that they need, right? What is happening in this space that is not quite working for them? That's a part of this lifelong learning and this experiencing and giving love and having wonder, right? It's not about us deciding what cultural humility looks like for other people. It's about us asking questions and being curious and who we invite to the table to help provide leadership as we sort of work through all of these different complexities of life. Our filters shape how we engage with each other. Our filters are the way that how we take in information and give information back out. You know, there's a couple push, hot button topics that I can just list off, and everybody would be having a different reaction. And if we were all in a space where we could talk, people would be saying different things about that. Gay marriage, abortion, right? Gun rights, all of these different things. And how we take that information, it goes through our filters, our people who have raised us, our communities, our backgrounds, our churches, and what they said about it and what we think about it, right? And sometimes our filters change because we've had different experiences. We go off to college, or we travel, or we do X, Y, and Z, and our filters begin to move and change, right? And then the things that we used to say, or the way that we used to engage with people may be different today than it was yesterday, because our filters are a place that we can affect each other. Our filters are not a place to end a conversation. It is a place to begin a conversation. Cultural humility helps us to not assume that all members of a culture or a group share the same beliefs and practices. You know, I went to a majority white college in South Bend, Indiana. And I remember one of my classmates using the N-word. And I was a fighter back then, straight, from Chicago out to the cornfields of Indiana. So it got serious real fast. But I remember when we were in the dean's office, their sort of defense in that was that they grew up as a white person in a Black neighborhood, and their friends used that word and they used to use it around them. So cultural humility helps us to know that we don't start our understanding about other people from our past experience with a small percentage of that community. And that not all people of a certain background or diversity through all of that list that I read are the same and see the world the same. And so this is, again, back to that lifelong learning, understanding your power and privilege. There were a lot of times where people at that same college said things to me that were not funny and that I wanted to be offended by, but they were the majority. And I was sort of tired of this idea that every time I would complain or take offense to something, that I was being too sensitive or that I was taking things too serious. You know, some days I just didn't want to be bothered. And that's because the people who were responding and saying these things to me was that they were not recognizing their place of power, everywhere from in the classroom to, you know, the cafeteria, the dining hall. People would say things to me and not acknowledging that place of power is a mistake that a lot of us make when we feel uncomfortable because we've had some kind of misstep. We want to go to this place of being defensive and placating the power that we have and the fact that the person that we've offended may not really be able to say to us how offensive something was. And so we have to, cultural humility helps us to realize that not all people and people groups are the same. I am a Black girl who grew up in a Puerto Rican neighborhood. I didn't know I was Black till I was about 21 years old. We moved to Humboldt Park, a Puerto Rican neighborhood in Chicago when I was 3 or 4. It's where I got socialized. All my friends were Puerto Ricans and their parents were Puerto Rican. Our neighborhood was so Puerto Rican, we sang the national anthem to Puerto Rico in Spanish in assembly every day. So even there are some times where Black people will see me in a crowd where there's not a lot of people of color. Y'all know how we do, Black people who are on here, you start looking and being like, oh, I'm gonna go sit with y'all. But there have been times where, you know, people of color have approached me and then realized like, you got a little bit of accent, you sound a little different, like where you from, right? And so cultural humility, that's another benefit of it. Cultural humility helps us to acknowledge how past experiences affect our present interactions. So again, things like people saying, I had a Black friend who let me use the N-word. Cultural humility, again, helps us to acknowledge how past experiences affect our present interactions. And it also goes the other way, where people who have had bad experiences with the police or with authority, not believing them, not being on their side, not having justice or due diligence for them. And so when you say, let's go to the principal's office, or let's call a cop, or let's bring this person in, and the person is like, yeah, no, that's not how I want to roll in this, right? And cultural humility helps us to step back and think about why have wonder, right? And love and patience and listening about why somebody would respond that way. And so instead of making assumptions based on your filters of officer friendly or how things go, you have curiosity and you position yourself in a place as a learner to hear the real fears that that person may be experiencing. You know, recently they were saying everybody should wear face masks, you know, and I have a friend who makes them, and I said, could you please put on mine that says don't shoot? And I'm not playing about that. I think Black and brown men running around with homemade masks on their face is not gonna go well for some of them. It's already happening. Someone was telling me about a police officer who approached a Black man and told him he had to remove the mask from his face, even though days before there was a national mandate that everybody should be wearing masks. So cultural humility helps us to acknowledge that the past and even the present has not been the same amount of equity, inclusion, and diversity for everyone. And so when we pull back and we say, we don't feel comfortable, or we don't like it, or we don't understand it, or if it's not for us, whether that's through age or able-bodiedness or language or access to education, whatever it is, if a kid says, I don't feel comfortable taking that test or reading an essay on that topic in front of my classmates, believe them. Because if you've asked them to write an essay about being oppressed. Their essay is going to be filled with vulnerabilities that maybe some other people in the classroom may mock or make it an unsafe place or hold receipts and bring it back up. So cultural humility helps us to acknowledge that everybody's experiences and interactions are not the same. And because of love and openness and the essence of this, we want to hold that space in a place of continued learning, thinking about and addressing our power, and taking ownership and being accountable for the moves we make, whether consciously or unconsciously. I'm almost done, y'all. I think, it's 6:50. We were gonna have some questions, but I guess we could go over a little bit. Cultural humility helps us know how to share power amongst diverse leaders. Cultural humility helps us to realize that words matter, assumptions matter, single stories matter. Cultural humility helps us to witness the humanity of others so that when we enter into each other's space, we do it with love and mutuality. We do it with solidarity versus charity. The hard work of cultural humility means that we have to establish our values versus our commitments. There's a lot of things that we value, but what are we committed to? What is that thing in your space that if someone does or crosses a line, that they will be handled? You know, when I was a kid, I watched the movie Roots. And that was a big thing, a big deal for people of color. Roots. It was the first time an African-American was able to trace their heritage back to Africa. And they made a movie and we were sitting in front of the TV with popcorn and Kool-Aid. Let's be clear, Kool-Aid, right? Too sweet, but very delicious. And I was, about 9 or 10, and I was very excited. And the opening scene messed me up because it was like white people chasing a bunch of Black bodies. And I didn't know that that's what that was going to be about. Well, my reaction to that was to start a hate group, a Black hate group. But I already mentioned that I grew up in a Puerto Rican neighborhood. So that Black hate group was me and about 6 Puerto Rican girls. We'll say they were Afro-Latino. And, my mom was always a person who was on top of things and like dealing with our crap, right? And, we had bandanas, we had all kind of, and there wasn't but a few white kids in our neighborhood, and we just tortured them and treated them real bad, called them names. And one day I came home from school and I noticed that there were some boxes by the door. And I was like, they look like packing boxes. I was like, are we moving? Like, what's going on? And the further I ventured through the house, I noticed that some of my pictures were gone and my toys were gone. And I said to my mom, what's happening? It seems like I'm moving. And she sat me down and she said, you're correct. See, because what has become apparent to me is that you are biased and prejudiced. And I'm not interested in housing, clothing, and or feeding someone who has that kind of hate in their heart. And I don't want you to live here anymore because I don't want you to influence my other kids. My mom was telling me what her values were. Well, she had a lot of values: treat people kindly, address people. But what her commitment was is that in her house was not happening. And we end up having this long conversation where she broke down to me like what was happening to me. I cried a lot. I remember her saying, be careful that you don't become the very thing that you say you hate or that you stand against. So the hard work of cultural humility means that we have to establish our values versus our commitments. We have to evaluate our level of investment. So whatever space you in, a church, a school, your house, your mama house, a business, you need to start doing some kind of race audit or cultural humility audit, or the lack of, and find out who is invested in at what level. Because that'll be important about who you put in leadership and who you allow to be over or in a place of leadership over other people. The hard work is changing how we think and work with diverse groups. Unlearning and relearning, so important. I grew up in a very conservative evangelical church. It's not for me, it's for some other people, I get. But I stopped going to church for 7 years because I had a desire to unlearn all the things that I had learned. And instead, I spent my time reading and listening to great thinkers who had a lot of compassion and a lot of great things to talk about how the world operates when we see each other in our humanity and not our rightness. And after that time, I was able to find another type of church and go in and relearn the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, which was not encased in legalism and righteousness that came with dominance over other people's lives and their freedom of being and choosing who they were. This hard work means that we have to work through privilege. White people who are on this, you really got to do your work in this because of the filters, the places and spaces that y'all have grown up in. And I'm not trying to put y'all on blast, but we know that this country was built on oppression and dominance over another and other people group. And whether you actively participate in it or not, you still reap the benefits of the privilege of having white skin and white privilege and living in a world, in a country that centers whiteness. That's the topic for another time, but hear me and believe me. The last thing, the hard work of cultural humility is understanding the consequences of cultural ignorance. Chimamanda Adichie has a TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story. It's great, it's a TED Talk. The Danger of a Single Story. If you Google it, she coming up at the top because it's fire. And she tells a lot of good stories, some cute, some funny, some that get to the core of the danger, like this inherent place of non-safety and trauma and pain that we can do to each other's life when we do not practice cultural humility, when we are not lifelong learners and learning from people who it is their life experience and not as them feeling like they have to be the teacher, but you paying to go to a workshop or buying a book or doing an online course, like you putting money where your desire is and not just expecting your coworker who's in the cubicle next to you on her own time to be traumatized by your questions, or your friend who is deaf to explain to you what that life is like. You do the work, you make the investment, you put in the practice, you do the hard work of cultural humility, not so that you can understand people better, that's a benefit of it, but really so that you will not traumatize, hurt, and abuse and marginalize other folks. You know, when I went to college, I told you it was this very white, college. I had some perception about white folks, and my friends would take me to their farm And their parents would talk to me about crops and what would happen if the harvest didn't come in. And I had some work to do around cultural humility and realizing that the labels that and the boxes that I wanted to put my friends and their families in was not the whole story. And I had some work to do, and we all have some work to do. But when we do this work, we know that there's this beautiful life experience that can happen on the other side. And so I am out of time. It is 7 o'clock. So I was gonna do some questions and stuff, but I think that might be a wrap. I thought it was gonna be hard for me to like really get into it because there wasn't people in the room. But it has really helped that you guys were making comments on the other side and that everybody said hello, and it was engaging, and that really helped me to feel a part of the space and a part of this community. So yeah, so thanks for coming. If you checked a coat at the coat room, don't forget to pick that up. If you need your parking validated, you can get that done at the front desk. And blessings to all of you as you leave this space and go to the next places that God has called you and led you to be in and to be a part of the community. Have grace for yourself, but not so much that you take yourself off the hook to put other people on it. Blessings. Bye, everybody.